Hello and welcome to AI in Canada, From Hype to Impact. It's a series that explores how Canadian industries are transitioning from AI hype to achieving tangible business outcomes. I'm Derek Marinos, your host and moderator for today's panel, which is taking a closer look at AI in Canada's manufacturing sector. And today's webinar is also part of CGI's Global AI Insights Exchange. Now, the key challenge for manufacturers isn't just adopting AI, but leveraging it effectively to enhance efficiency, decision-making, and resilience. With looming supply chain disruptions and rising costs driven by tariffs, resilience is essential for manufacturers to stay competitive. Today, our expert panel will cut through the noise, share some practical insights, and discuss how manufacturers can scale AI responsibly to build a resilient, future-proof industry. Let's meet the experts. Let's begin with Christine Andrews.
Hi, thanks for having me. And I'm Christine Andrews with Dataiku. I lead our manufacturing practice here within Dataiku as part of AI democratization.
Thank you, Christine. Diego.
So I'm Diego Salomone. I'm the lead data scientist for the Industry 4.0 at Rio Tinto Aluminum.
Wonderful. Welcome. Maxim.
Hey, thanks, Eric. So Maxim Toupin, I've been with CGI for a number of years, helping clients, manufacturing clients, especially optimizing their operations, modernizing their infrastructure, and be more efficient, especially in these challenging times.
Excellent. Welcome, Max. Finally, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. Chris Juryn, I'm Vice President of Emerging Technologies, focused on AI, machine learning, generative AI, and cloud computing. Really, where a lot of my focus is how do you simplify some of these complex technologies, make them accessible, make them real, show those the business value for our clients and organizations to really drive outcomes.
Wonderful. Keep it simple. Love to do that. And I think that's going to be a nice theme for folks. Chris, always a pleasure to have you. Let's kick off the conversation with a look at the AI ecosystem in manufacturing and the key challenges and opportunities. And Christine, how does AI democratization impact manufacturers trying to scale AI initiatives?
I think there's really three components to it, and that is trust, heterogeneity, diversity, and then time. And I'll explain a little each of those. One of the largest reasons that a lot of either AI projects fail or they don't move beyond POC that I've seen in my experience is lack of value creation. And so that means you have to have trust. And trust part of the people that are actually having to take action. Oftentimes, you've got kind of a bifurcated approach where you're doing, you have data science teams invested in building out the models, and then those are meant to empower people at the shop floor or engineers and those sorts. So you really have to have that trust. So when you talk about scaling it, it means building that trust, and you have to think about that in a programmatic way. The second part, though, that kind of complicates it, but also means that scale is absolutely critical, and you have to think of that at the outset, really, is around the heterogeneity and diversity of equipment and processes. So if you create something, and I have seen this done, right, where a model is developed and it's created for one particular line or asset, a very code-heavy application, and one particular type of product line as well, or SKU, and it fails to scale beyond that, because then everything is different when you go beyond that particular piece of equipment. So you need to think about the diversity of equipment, people, processes, products out there, all of which mean that you've got to really engage with those stakeholders in a scalable way and create something that people have trust in, but they also have transparency throughout the process. And then it's all about, and then time is always a factor in anything, right? So the efficiency in terms of your data science teams and being able to, 70% of their time roughly, or Diego can speak to it better, is spent in a lot of that data engineering and prep phase.
Right.
And being able to truncate that in any way by leveraging some of the data analysis and the contextualization that's already being done by those domain experts is absolutely critical.
And Diego, let's explore for a moment, what are some of the biggest obstacles you face in implementing AI across large-scale manufacturing operations over at Rio Tinto?
Yeah, so I think in Rio Tinto specifically, and I can talk about the last 5 years here, I think we have a very traditional company, and it will resonate elsewhere, in my opinion. but there's like a lack of literacy on the business where people used to work and produce on a traditional way. And the advent of artificial intelligence brings a new way of insights or a whole new world when using the data they already have. And that's a very big challenge, because when you open the hood, the data we think we have is not necessarily usable. So one of the largest challenges that we have right now, if we want to go at scale, is the data quality and the governance around it. So that those two challenges are what my team is actually attacking right now. So everything related to data stewardship, metrics on data quality at rest at the production level. So how we can do that in an efficient, governed, and scale way. I think that's probably what we are facing as issues right now.
Thank you very much for that answer. And it's a nice segue to explore, I think, what role CGI plays in shaping the AI ecosystem for manufacturing. And Chris, before I get to you, Max, I'd like you just to weigh in. We heard some interesting perspectives from Diego. What are you hearing from and seeing in some of the boardrooms? Are some of those issues coming up as well in the conversations you're having?
I think it's it's totally in line with what Diego mentioned, but also with Christine's earlier point about processes. So there's a lot of talk these days, for the past couple of years, that we hear about generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI, such as ChatGPT and all the other applications of that flavor. But the one that really impacts the companies, the manufacturing companies, is the one that influences their business processes. So that's the bottom line right there. And in this field, in Canada specifically, we're witnessing an important evolution in that sense, namely with respect to the size of the companies that are adopting artificial intelligence. Of course, today we're lucky to have Diego from Rio Tinto with us. But one thing that we notice also is that the size of the companies that are adopting artificial intelligence is gradually decreasing. So that's quite interesting from an adoption perspective. And one thing that also we always have to keep in mind, since small medium businesses don't have the same financials, technological, and human resource as large as a corporate organization. One of Canada's main asset in terms of AI adoption is the support that it offers to these businesses. So that has to keep going, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to increase that adoption for those businesses.
That's very interesting. And Chris, of course, support. And, I'd like to get your perspective now from an emerging technology point of view, which is going to underpin a lot of this, if you could weigh in.
For sure. So something that I kind of mentioned about how do we make it real? How do we kind of drive that value, make it accessible? And Christine, you were talking about that too, of how do you democratize this? And that's to kind of build on what Max is saying there. That's what we're seeing, right? It's becoming easier and easier to leverage AI. If I think back to 5 years ago, it was like PhD, data science, writing in R. Either you had been doing this is all you do, versus now, we got some Python scripts. I can even ask, Cursor and Claude to write all this stuff for me. There's so much out there that is making it easier to use. And that's a trend we're going to keep seeing. But also, making sure that we do truly understand what we're trying to do with that. And that's something I'm seeing with people. We're seeing more and more people play in this space, and there's almost like this FOMO going on of, I have to do something, so let me try something, as opposed to having a clear, concise plan of what we are trying to accomplish. You may not know how you're going to do it, but what does success mean? I say very often, if you can't fail, you can't learn. Right. There has to be an outcome we're trying to create with this. We're not just trying out AI, or we're not just going to try and, we just want our data to be better because that's what we should do. Well, no. What are we going to do? Is it speed to trusted action? Is it something that we can drive an outcome from this? That's where I'm seeing the most success coming from across industries, as well as just from when I talk about manufacturing in particular.
I think it's very interesting. And by the way, fear of missing out for those who didn't get the FOMO reference. I'd like to get everybody's perspective right now, at least on a quick rapid fire with this question. How can industry players collaborate better to accelerate AI adoption? I think this is a really important one. And Diego, I'll start with you. Get your perspective on that.
So it's a very good question. So what I think we should avoid, just to start, is overpromising, because AI adoption already faces some walls when you go to trust, because people think, for example, they will be replaced and all. So overpromises lead us to what we have now. People don't trust the solutions that we bring, or don't trust external vendors, for example. So if we focus on the people first, the solutions that they want, their needs, and then we empower that sort of people-centric approach and create insights around what they do on their daily lives, I think that's a very good way to start. At least most of the low-hanging fruits that we had that worked were people-centric.
Christine, now your perspective on how industry players can collaborate better to accelerate AI adoption.
Yeah, I think kind of launching off of what Diego was talking about. So Dataiku, we're an AI platform, right? We are meant to help enable that democratization, but we are technology. We're the technology piece of the people process technology. Mm-hmm. And the technology absolutely, to his point, it requires people, but I think from an overall collaborative standpoint, it absolutely requires like service partners and providers to be able to enable the people so that they can see kind of the art of the possible, and also take, in our case, right, a set of technological capabilities and make them relevant and make them tangible for your end user, everything from your planner to your supply chain planner to your analyst to your, a quality engineer or data scientist.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
Sure. So when I think about AI adoption and how to be successful with it, often it comes down less about AI itself. Diego, you were talking about having the data available and doing, like, making sure that's there. But how do we leverage our knowledge, our own internal data and expertise to do something unique in some way, right? It's not just about taking these pre-trained models that are out there and that we can all install and just leverage out of the box. But what are we bringing that's unique to that, and understanding how we're going to do that? And maybe I'll borrow from other industries, because I work across the board. And something that I've seen work really well from a banking and fintech is, how do you work together and bring an understanding to form these cross-company AI partnerships where you share your non-competitive data, because again, we're not going to share our competitive stuff, but share that to generate new insights. So it's not just now what I know, but my system gets larger and larger, that I can start doing more and more here to co-develop these models to drive value across both organizations. And that's where I've seen a lot of these partnerships really bear fruit, when there's something clear that we can do there. And then there's some other things, that Christine was talking about, how do we, the PPT, the people process and tools side of that, how do we bring all that in there? Like, we need to upskill our people. We need to have a change management process around that. This isn't just throwing it in there and hoping for the best. This truly is a technology that changes the way that we work.
Interesting. Diego, very quick.
On that, I think something that we can do as well is not just share the models or the insights, but the journey to it. Because the journey to get to a model sometimes can be translated from one company or finance, for example, to manufacturing. Yeah. And that tells a lot of stories. So we can learn a lot with how we get there.
And Max, I think from an executive perspective, the collaboration from the different lanes here, I think you're hearing similar things.
Absolutely, and I think the comments from my colleagues here are definitely on the same aspect as the one that I'm saying, in terms of obstacles that need to be overcome when it comes to collaboration between the industry players. But some of the low-hanging fruits that have to be considered at the beginning is to identify the specific business needs that AI could address. To Diego's earlier point, we need to manage expectation, and AI is not going to solve for everything. So we need to be very laser focused when it comes to the business need. Secondly, I would say the lack of knowledge. So technology, like Christine is talking about for Dataiku, there's a ton of technologies out there, helping for AI adoption, and I think this is it's about educating people about the availability of those technology that will help us to spread the usage of AI. And finally, the employee training and the compatibility with existing structure for infrastructure for manufacturing companies. So the more nimble, the more flexible an AI application can be with existing infrastructure, the better the better is going to be the adoption. Flexible is an important word here, and some of the elements that help to drive AI-driven operational efficiency and sustainability. This is the segue to our next segment here. And Diego, I'd like to begin with you. And essentially, how is AI helping optimize manufacturing operations and sustainability efforts with Rio Tinto?
I really love that topic. So I think our operators, our people, we are doing what we can with the tools that we have. So when we start with, now we have a carbon neutral approach, we have a decarbonization effort, we have sustainability goals. The processes are there, the tools are there. We are not producing more carbon because we want. So without a good change, without a good target and all, we won't change. So I think having this people-centric approach with a sustainability effort, with a sustainable goal in mind that touches people, can move the needle and touches the heart of our operators in this case. So the sustainability targets that we have in Rio Tinto really helped us adopt AI as a tool to improve our process, to optimize what we do, to maximize the value of the data that is there lying or being used by analysts and all, but by humans in the loop. But now we are empowering those humans in the loop, democratizing a few concepts and transforming them, for example, in citizen data scientists, and helping them maximize the value that they have for the same data that they used before.
Sounds like some really good progress. And Maxim, from a business enablement perspective, what are you hearing?
So I think from a business enablement, this is really the seed phase of AI when it comes to organization implementing this new processes. And companies often that have carried out a first AI project tend to follow with a second, with a third, and a fourth one. So you get addicted to this this new way of doing things. And what we see is that within a few years, the adoption of AI is expected, obviously, to spread all across companies, including the small ones. And despite the fact that most high performance solutions are still custom built and therefore costly right now, but and that leads us to say that we're a long way from mass adoption. However, it's evolving and it's getting better every day, and it evolves over time. And ultimately, what we hope and what we expect to see is that we're going to get into a subscription model for AI, which is going to be very easy to use. And when the market is sufficiently advanced, this is what we're going to see.
Yeah, simplifying again, back to a very common theme, but there still are challenges. And Chris, I'd like to come to you with this one. What are the key challenges in integrating AI with legacy systems, for example, and how can they be overcome?
Yeah, legacy always poses challenges, right? Like it's easy when you're say born in the cloud or born as an AI first organization, but if you're trying to bring this into your organization, it's not always going to be the easiest. And this might feel like a bit of a theme, but it feels like it's all about the data. Like that's one of the biggest challenges. If I have all my data sitting in a legacy system over here that I can't really access, then it makes it more difficult. So to me, that's one of the reasons that I look at, like, how do we kind of start getting that data out? So one of the challenges that's there, it's fragmented, it's kind of inconsistent in their format. And one approach we've got is to use a data lakehouse architecture. And don't worry if you're not too familiar with these, but really what we're doing there is kind of creating this unified place to grab our structured and unstructured data. Now more is available for us to do what we want to do with it, and it's still compatible with our legacy systems. And then you want to make sure, though, if we start creating these new data stores, have an end in mind. Know why you're doing it, because it will turn into your data lake will turn into a data swamp in no time. The other big thing is cost of modernization. This isn't cheap to do. This is an investment that comes in, and sometimes the opportunity cost is hard to justify or hard to understand if we don't have a clear understanding of what our ROI is going to be. So you need to make sure you're seeing business value along the way, taking somewhat of an iterative approach. It can't just be only low-hanging fruit, but knowing what you're going to do with that, to me, is super important. And then understanding the people side of this. Like, if we're dealing with legacy systems or just systems in general, people resist change. If I tell you I'm going to change the way you're working, I'm going to change what your day-to-day looks like, sometimes people don't like that. So what's in it for me? The WIFM is so important to be able to answer that across the board and have that be very clear of what value it's going to bring and how it's going to be used going forward.
Yeah, that strong value proposition, very important. And Christine, I think that this segues nicely to you in terms of if you could explain what role does AI and machine learning play in predictive maintenance and efficiency improvements?
Yeah, and predictive maintenance is a good one because there are traditional techniques, what I'll call traditional techniques, like thermography, vibration analysis, acoustic analysis, of which have been around for a while, and also the parametric-based predictive maintenance, which in high cost of failure assets and industries has also been in use. I think what we see, so the value is pretty well documented and established. I mean, you're talking about 20% or more improvement in terms of a reduction in unplanned downtime in many cases for predictive maintenance, regardless of which, kind of flavor it takes. And even when you talk about, we have customers that use, they're doing AI machine learning for acoustic analysis. So I think what's changed over the last, 20, 30 years is one, the availability of data, the availability of these technologies, so that they've been able to proliferate beyond just like a power generation, high cost of failure gas combustion turbine kind of predictive maintenance, right? To much more accessible across your swath of motors in a facility, for example. And then also, though, the trend from having experts that would analyze some of these images, for example, to being able to now orchestrate that using a machine learning model, have it less subjective, more scalable, more automated, and obviously then you can scale it out much more easily and widely, and people are no longer the bottleneck.
No, interesting. And I appreciate those thoughts and sentiments, and let's wrap up the block now. And I do want to get your thoughts on where do you see the greatest return on investment for AI in manufacturing today? And I want to get everybody's perspective on this one. And Diego, I'll start with you.
I think Christine just mentioned, for example, predictive maintenance. It's a very good return on investment because traditionally, those machines, they had telemetry before. We did control loops. They worked on closed control loops. So that data that was resting there, being used for immediate control, but stored, hopefully, can be used, for example, to improve our maintenance routines, to predict a failure. So I think if I were to start now with AI, predictive maintenance would be a very good field.
Chris, I think Diego points something really interesting out. The data's there, but it's how you use it downstream, which really makes the difference. And maybe you could speak to that.
Sure. And maybe I mentioned to be successful, sometimes some of that, where we can see some immediate ROI. One area we're seeing across industry that's great is like knowledge management systems. So if you have a process right now or an area that is leveraging data, having to collect it over and over again, sometimes it's buried in different documentations on your SharePoint, in your email, sticky notes, kind of everywhere. How do we start to bring that in? And this is something that AI and generative AI in particular has done a great job of taking this unstructured data, bringing it forward. And maybe something just to talk about that's unique about AI. Like we can create these point solutions. And when I say point solutions, we can add it to where we currently are. So an example of something that's not a point solution is cloud. I can't add a little cloud to my application or my system and make it useful. But AI, we can do that, right? We can have a part of a process that we can improve upon and bringing in an AI component that drives immediate value, revenue, customer satisfaction, whatever outcome we're trying to create that is unique to AI for some other systems, that right away we can start seeing that and get that ball rolling if that's where people are at and trying to move forward.
Max.
So you mentioned ROI, Derek. So I think there's potentially, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think there's probably three options here that are where we see the greatest ROI in the manufacturing industry. So obviously, predictive maintenance is the most important, most likely, and then you have obviously supply chain optimization that comes next, and there's lots of opportunity right there, and finally the logistic related cost reduction. So when you have all those three lined up, a company that has a decision to make in this sense, and they need to compare the sectorial practices for these specific those specific areas, and because it's not a given that predictive maintenance is or supply chain will be the area with the highest ROI. But what's important is that companies have to understand what whether those predictive maintenance, for instance, is being used by all players in the industry, and then that's where the most bang for the buck is most likely to be, because otherwise, if you always want to go off the beaten path, then there's less technology available, so that could be a decision factor right there. So, but the bottom line, I think most important, when you engage when a company engage into a specific area, it remains critical to constantly monitor the KPIs to avoid sinking money in an endless well. So when it comes to user satisfaction, adoption rate, cost reduction, so all those KPIs have to be monitored constantly to make sure that it remains a good ROI ultimately.
Thank you, Max. Christine, I'll let you compliment or finish off the block. I know you led in with ROI. Max added supply chain, and we've heard some other perspectives. Is there anything else we're missing here, or do you think we've covered it pretty good?
I think Max was touching on it, and that is, it depends highly on the business segment or the particular industry. Like pharma and semiconductor, I'll tell you, with the majority of our use cases, it's all quality. Like the vast majority, and they derive a ton of benefit, right? Yeah, I can see you smiling, Chris. Yeah, exactly. And it is, and if you think about it, they've got a lot of opportunistic downtime. There can be a lot of changeovers. There's a lot of batch operations.
Yeah.
So for them, and that 1%, it means millions upon millions of dollars. So that's an area that honestly we do tremendous. And then Max talked about supply chain, but inventory is absolutely huge right now.
Right, of course. Okay, moving on to segment 3. And this is a real fun one for me. When we talk about scaling AI, going from pilot to really enterprise-wide deployment. And Chris, many AI projects start as pilots but struggle to scale. Yeah. What are the common roadblocks, and how can they be addressed?
For sure, and to be honest, Derek, we're seeing a lot of this with our clients, right? And Max even touched on it, right? The first one, we get something there and then we get just stuck with these POCs. We can't get the second, third, fourth to production, or we test a bunch of stuff out, but nothing really comes of it. And I touched on a big thing, like a big, proponent of if you can't fail, you can't learn. I won't harp on that too much, but having that idea. But one thing that we're seeing, and one thing that me and my team have really been focused on, is how do you really have that defined process and approach to drive innovation and go past the POC to get to production, right? So to me, it's about, like, we've created an AI lab that lets you kind of rapidly experiment and responsibly implement. And the idea there is, first you need to have a base. Where do you do AI, right? Like, so understanding, is it like, in a cloud? Is it one of the cloud providers like Azure, AWS, GCP, something like that? Also maybe on-prem hybrid approach. Where are we going to execute on it? What's approved from the different cloud that we're allowed to use and on-prem, and the capabilities and the services. Also third-party platforms, right? Like Dataiku, is that an approved tool? If it's not, get it approved so we can start leveraging this and use it. So then we know where we can experiment. So then when we do an execution on something, it's not that I did all this work on DeepSeek and, oh shoot, I'm not allowed to use that. Okay, so I better find something else that I can do this on. It's a waste of time. So understanding where we can do it. The next thing is what we need to do. So having a strong intake process, intake the work, gather the information we need, have a prioritization criteria. What do we prioritize? I want it to be quantitative So it's not just one person's opinion that matters on this. It's actually a process of gathering the information that we can learn from, and then having your risk assessment on that. So security is baked in, not bolted on at the end, right? We want to have all these things up front so we know where that is. And then finally, how do we execute? Having an execution framework is really important too. The way we execute a generative AI project is different than some of the traditional machine learning things that Christine was touching on. Very different than creating a web application and the way we've done this work. So having that execution framework and how we're going to do it, so we know where we're going to do it, we know what we should do, we know how we're going to get that done. And then finally, as we start to mature, bring in that automation, bring in that understanding, and make it easier for people to do the work on our approved reference architectures and have a governance council across the entire top is where, when we follow these, then we're seeing a lot of success within organizations.
Christine, you'd like to maybe follow up a bit from a pharmaceutical perspective?
Oh, yeah. And it's funny, Chris mentioned risk. And I think about that in terms of, a lot of what they'll do from a predictive quality standpoint, for example, predictive yield, it has GMP implications, right? So being able to map out that process, that's huge. Not only the transparency, which, I heard, that's what I heard when I was hearing Chris talk, is the need for transparency throughout, but also being able to map out that process of what needs to be signed off, what are the risk implications at various points. That is, to me, huge. And honestly, it's, they have entire teams, of course, dedicated to that.
Yeah, interesting. And on the sign off too, I think you raise a really good point. And Christine, I'd like to come to you next here as well with, I think it's an important question when we're talking about, collaboration and how can AI platforms enable organizations to scale AI solutions effectively?
Okay, yeah, different ways. One is you can have everything from, I would say, call it basic, but a sign-off type of auditing process where you have to review, audit maybe, for example, Diego mentioned it early on about data quality, right? So to being able to review that, yeah, you know what, from a manufacturing perspective, yes, those were all my batches yesterday, for example. But then you have kind of the next phase, which we have a lot of customers moving to, which is more, okay, I'm a domain expert. Maybe I'm a supply chain analyst, inventory manager. I could also be, a process engineer. I'm going to be directly involved in kind of that data prep engineering and, really feature engineering to some extent. Maybe it's just doing statistical analysis, kind of basic orchestration, joining together different data sets. But then I can surface those up so that way, somebody like Diego then has understanding of what I care about as he begins to build out these models, and he's able to, hopefully truncate his data engineering process. Then there's the final stage where there's actually two ways, but one is more of prototyping, where you actually have some of these engineers prototyping models. We see that, probably not, that's growing. That's not as great as the aforementioned data engineering piece. And then finally, I know we mentioned a little bit, but agentic AI is a big trend right now. Everybody's looking to how do we become like a little bit more prescriptive with having these agents that then allow the domain expert to ask questions, and then they can also provide feedback. Yeah, that makes sense, or no, you're off the mark.
Thank you. Diego, now can you share an example of a successful AI initiative at Rio Tinto that moved beyond the pilot stage?
Yep. We have a few, but one of my favorites involves decarbonization. So the aluminum production involves extracting aluminum from something that has oxygen, and we attach carbon, we produce greenhouse gases. So that's intrinsic to the process. But everyone around the process knows about that. So when we came with an idea that, hey, let's do this to predict what we are doing, to efficiently measure what we are doing, they were like on board. So this attachment, this buy-in that we had from the clients that were also our suppliers of the data. So it was really a collaborative approach. Started with research, then came to my team. We are applying AI, and then we went to the shop floor. We did a pilot. We tested. We evolved generations of the POC or the model in this case, And after a very successful collaboration with the shop floor, we had like more than 90% of efficiency in detecting the operation and the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce. So now we can say that people that before were operators, no contact with artificial intelligence at all, they trust that we can create, for example, virtual sensors that help them operate better, generate less carbon, and then be a better operator in general. So I think we have some of those. And the good thing, like the bottom line, is this buy-in from the clients or the users, and usually it involves, for example, sustainability, which is an interesting topic.
No, it is, and it sounds like a really wonderful success story. Before I get to the rapid fire panel question here to end our block, just a reminder to everybody who's taking part in today's webinar, feel free to drop in a question in the comments. We'd be happy to field them. So if you do have one for our panelists, please feel free to drop one in. Okay, final question for everybody here on the panel. And Max, I'll kick it off with you. What cultural or organizational shifts are needed to support AI adoption at scale?
I think here at scale is the key word, and it's not necessarily a shift. It's more a continuum that the current situation, but bottom line, it's 3 words: education, education, education. Many small and medium-sized companies don't know where to start when it comes to artificial intelligence. So it's also those companies that, that have started to play with ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, etc. But there's few steps that can help them to quickly demystify this emerging technological creature, and most importantly, they have to know what they want to do first, what type of artificial intelligence they want to use, whether it's machine learning, predictive AI, Gen AI. So that's the starting point, because otherwise you can shoot in multiple directions and not necessarily reaching a goal. And ultimately, perhaps the other piece of no, I don't want to say piece of advice, but the other behavior that we see is the adoption of a portfolio approach by those companies that are adopting AI. Just like someone's is managing his financial portfolio, so you want to balance the risk amongst different projects. So you're going to have going from low risk and high return projects that that you're secure with these projects, and you also want to have other projects that will be bolder and sometimes riskier innovation. So it's the fair balance of these of all the projects, AI projects that a company has, that remains important.
Thank you, Max. Christine, Max is focusing on back to school and balance. 2 important things: education, education, education. What else could you add to that?
Don't make perfect the enemy of the good. I mean, it's been said a million times, I think, but don't wait for your data to be perfect, because it's not going to be. And don't think all the time that it's about prediction. I always say you can't predict what you don't understand. And actually, a lot of AI technologies, clustering, machine learning being an obvious example, can be used to actually help surface up things like anomalies or outliers. So don't necessarily think about prediction. Doesn't have to be there. You can start with just like harmonizing some of your inventory and some of your materials, right, using AI, and that can be a fantastic way to do it.
Chris?
Yeah, so, and Max, I always thought it was location, 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 but now I know it's education, education, education.
Lunchbox time.
Yeah. So when it comes to that, like sometimes it's like, well, how do I learn, right? Like how do I get started? How do I learn on that? I'm a big believer in the 70-20-10 framework for learning, that if you want to become an expert, 10% is formal learning, so taking courses, taking certifications, things like that. 20% is from talking with people in kind of ad hoc conversations, talking about these things, and I'm a big talker on these type of things, it feels like. And then 70% hands-on. You got to use it. You got to get it into your purview and start using those different tools and different technologies, and that's how you're going to become an expert. But there is a path forward of all of that. So how do we leverage that is going to be really important. And then when we talk about some of those organizational cultural shifts, transparency and trust of our teams is important. Like, people have to trust what we're going to do. Our customers have to trust what we're going to do with their data. If there's no trust, Nobody wants you to use it in that way. If we don't think you're going to use it in an ethical way, in a responsible way, I don't want you using my data. If I trust you, I can trust that. So how do you bring that to your own organization and make it clear outside of it as well that this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and then that'll help us to scale so we don't get caught up in having to kind of prove ourselves each and every time.
And Diego, final comment.
I think that trust really resonates with the buy-in that I was mentioning for the very specific use case that I mentioned. So build that takes time, takes flagship initiatives, for example, the few pilots that work, the benefits that you generate, the democratization of concepts. So to generate really that chain of command, the change management, everyone around the project that will receive it, that will support. For example, what Christine said, you don't need necessarily to predict something to make good use of AI. You can probably explain what's happening. Since your operator knows about the process, if he knows what's happening, he will take the best decision. So I think building this trust, democratizing the concept, democratizing the tooling around, so people use advanced analytics, advanced tooling instead of paper, PDFs, Excels. I think it's a full journey for every size of company.
Interesting perspective. We do have our next segment, which is coming up, of course, on data ethics and governance in manufacturing AI. We do have a question from the audience. And Chris, I think we can fire this out to you and have a shot at it. Question from Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you for the question, of course. Do companies realize the potential use of AI to reduce workers and cycle times of activities, processes being performed?
For sure. So what I'm hearing from that is like, do companies realize the potential that AI has to reduce how much time I'm spending, all these different things, and also potentially there can be impact on workforce itself. So to me, yes, that's where we're looking, is how do we bring improvement, right? So Diego, you're talking about human in the loop, right? How do I bring new insights that I didn't have before? Or I was talking about using knowledge base pieces of how can I surface information quicker? We were working with one organization where it took about 6 months to collect the information per case that they were working on, to just different departments, different pieces of information they had to get it from there. Went from 6 months, then we used an agentic AI solution to 6 minutes. So that greatly reduced the cycle time to do work. And what they ended up using that for was to get through this backlog of work they had, that hundreds of thousands of items they had to get through that that was just growing. Now they're seeing it shrink. So they're actually seeing that value from that. So that's something that we are seeing. But really what I heard from Jonathan there, that we need to see what is this going to be. Again, it's not just to use AI for the sake of AI, it's actually to drive value.
Diego, quick comment on that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we see, for example, is that with the advent of virtual sensors, or you create something that for those people doing that, you avoid someone going to a shop floor, measuring something, going to the lab. So you reduce the time that you expose someone to risk, to expose someone to operation. And you also accelerate the time that data will be available for downstream operations. So I think the usage of virtual sensors, for example, can greatly reduce the cycle time of many operations.
Okay, we'll move on to segment 4 right now for data ethics and governance in manufacturing and AI. And I think this is, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Friction's never an awesome thing, but I think we do need to talk about it. And Christine, I'd like to come to you first. What are the biggest data governance challenges that manufacturers face when scaling AI?
Yeah, and I noticed there was a question in chat, kind of not really related to that, but around some of the geopolitical kind of situations, right, that we have.
There's an imperative for sure.
Yeah, and it impacts that. So on the governance side, we've talked a lot about data integrity. And we've talked about also the risk assessment, or we mentioned that a little bit earlier. Obviously, those take precedence, so I'm going to just say overall, it's all about transparency and control. And so there's some aspect of centralization of this, and where you see adoption further along, I'll use like pharmaceutical being a good example. other regulated industries such as aerospace. They've already been doing a lot of things in terms of AI. And it's because of that need for centralization and all the regulatory implications therein. I think that's largely why you've seen this, right, in some of the evolutions, these early leaders, I guess, in this space. So with all of that, I think that what you have to remember is the centralization isn't necessarily, if you're a smaller company, maybe don't have that regulatory rigor, it's maybe not something that's front of mind. But if you think about some of the implications versus, from a bias perspective, when you talk about how that can enter into agentic AI and hallucinations, then you realize and there's also the whole cost implications too, by the way, if you're just going to have everybody pinging ChatGPT, right? So that to me, it almost necessitates, that trend towards centralization where you can have some control and you can have oversight and you can mitigate the risk. And ultimately, it's all about the risk, right? So understanding what the implications of that hallucination is going to be and being able to manage that. That's one of the key things that we do. It's very much a heavy emphasis in Dataiku from a responsible AI perspective.
Okay, thank you. Chris, how can manufacturers balance AI innovation with regulatory compliance and cybersecurity concerns as well?
For sure. So when I think of the regulatory compliance piece where we're at right now, especially in Canada, like we're kind of driving down a highway with no speed limit and no guardrails just yet, right? Like there's a lot of openness of what we can do, but we know they're coming, right? Like there's different bills out there that are like may or may not get passed, but they will be there. We're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it in the US, like that they're coming, and we'll need to be able to follow this. So from that, like, how do you have AI by design, build in those guardrails early, and the ability to bring in new ones as we have changes that go on? So this isn't an afterthought. This is built in and designed from the very beginning. From a cybersecurity standpoint, these are all new attack vectors, right? Like I would talk to some of my friends in cybersecurity here at CGI, like Subin, and him and I will chat on this and say, like, what do we have to do? What can we, like, what are the best approaches? To me, one of the best things we can do is have that zero trust model to start. So that just means don't trust data and think everything's right. Don't trust users. Don't trust prompts. We have to be able to validate these over and over again and bring in that rigor of what we're doing. And then also when we think about those ethical concerns that go in, like the bias and the unreliable outcomes that happen, often the data we use in our models to train them, they're biased, right? We're taking it from people, from systems, and if you don't think there's bias in the world today, you're wrong. There is bias out there. So how do we identify that? But what I think is really cool is that we can actually remove bias from AI, but you can't remove it from people, right? If I'm the one making a decision and I'm biased towards a group of people or a situation, I'm going to be biased. I'm not going to admit to it, but I'm going to be biased. AI, we can test this and we can remove it. And just keep in mind, this is the worst version of AI you're ever going to see. It's only going to get better, and we are making it better. So these are challenges that we can solve. They're not easy. They're not being solved today, but they will be solved. And we're going to see this continue evolving, be better and better, in my opinion.
I think that's an important point and thank you for that, Chris, because this is iterations. It's evolving. And like you said, everyone is going to be, at least the hope is anyway, it'll be better and getting better. Mm-hmm. Diego, we got a question from the audience, from Gil, and I think it kind of dovetails really nicely into our segment as well. So the question is, how do you handle the ethical aspects when defending the integrity of the AI solution and ensuring its veracity while mitigating risks of AI hallucinations?
It's a very, very interesting question. So I think what we should, the angle that we need here is the explainability, and again, having the human in the loop. So if you think about the new initiatives, the new technologies around AI, if you go back 10 years, for example, they started as models, everyone tried to use, etc. Then we had the issues on, for example, trusting. So when we started to explain the thinking behind those answers, those numbers, etc., and humans again could look at that and say, okay, those are the features that are important. This is how the model came to this solution. So to ensure the veracity, explainability is key, and that will include going through people in the process. So I'm not against automating most of our processes, but having people supervising that, validating that what is important to the model is important to the business is really the key aspects that it should be looking, that would like confirm that the model is going into a right direction. If we are talking about generative AI, then it's a different conversation, because it's so new that, and it's so like spread, that I think the explainability is coming now, because it was the issue 1 year ago. So now with the reasoning, with something like that, I think we can get that same feeling that we had when you were trying to explain traditional models, but I think it's coming slower. But it will come. I think explainability and transparency are key to get a true and ethical answer from a model.
Yeah, and that's the foundation at the end of the day. I mean, if you don't have that, what are you resting it on? Very good point. Thank you for answering Gil's question. Christine, another question from the audience. Amin is asking, could you share your perspective on how AI-driven decision-making is influencing manufacturing sustainability initiatives?
I know Diego brought up a really good use case for Rio Tinto. We have a customer of ours that really has done some great work with actually production planning, probably similar, I think, in the vein what Diego's doing. In their particular instance, it's a very electricity intensive operation, so it's a big cost driver. And what they are able to do is, obviously they take the IoT data that dictates or tells them, right, reveals how much they're consuming from an electricity perspective. But then they're also using like weather forecasting information as well as energy market data and prediction to then forecast what the cost implications are when they are producing at certain times of the day. So we've seen some customers, for example, be able to make, and where you have that latitude, right, been able to make certain scheduling decisions as we're going to produce this particular type of product at nighttime versus during the day. And that would be very, very hard to do, right, without something like AI. So I think it enables, and I think that was Diego's point, I think it really enables you to be more forward thinking and more sustainable and energy conscious. I just don't think you could do it otherwise.
Thank you. And thank you for answering Amin's question. Okay, moving on to our final segment. And we always like to end the show with some forward looking and looking into a bit of a crystal ball, so to speak. How do we see all this evolving? Let's get some perspective on what the top AI trends that will define manufacturing in the next few years. Max, I'd like to start with you.
So, potentially when you start an AI project is essentially to start small and scale smart. So instead of overhauling your entire operations, begin with a targeted AI pilot project like predictive maintenance that we talked about, quality control or demand forecasting, these types of needs. Choose a high impact area with clear ROI and, to ensure seamless data integration and upskill your workforce. So once proven that scale AI, strategically across your operations for maximum efficiency and innovation. So this is, the potentially what we're going to see very often going forward. So that would be the final, I would say, the conclusion on my end on this part.
Chris.
Yeah. So Christine, you mentioned this a little bit when you were talking about the rise of the agentic AI that's coming, right? Like, in many people, we've heard of this. We're hearing about agent-based AIs. And the way that I'm seeing that is like this is like ChatGPT when it came out. Everyone's kind of talking about it, seeing what they can do, seeing how to use it. In the near term, we're seeing that this is really changing the way that we're driving value across organizations. One example would be in the development space. So what we're seeing even internally here at CGI, we're seeing like we migrated 2 million lines of Java code in about over 50% less time than it would have taken just doing it by hand. Right, we leveraged another one that was this front end, 20-year-old front end that was written and no one knew how to support. No one knew even the coding, that we were able to migrate 3 million lines of that code 70% faster than we estimated. We did just a test between two different people. That one that was using AI, that one wasn't. We're seeing the time, so it's pretty pretty interesting. We're using things like GitHub Copilot, Amazon Q for Developer. There's different ones you have to use that are there. But it's going way beyond that, right? It's not just at a AI off to the side. It's actually becoming like as good or better than people at that. And we internally we did some tests where we were able to use things like Cursor and Claude together to just through prompts create web applications that work fully, that you can change this, change that, add filtering, add all this stuff. And a guy from my team, Nuno, was able to produce that in about 4 hours, that he's able to do this work. So we're seeing it go from like this AI that's kind of there to just actually being front and center to the work we're doing and changing the way that we're working. And that's going to accelerate, in my opinion. This is just going to keep getting more and more as we see this go on. So it's not just about, like, there's a bit of fear there, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt is going to be there. But how do we harness this? How do we take advantage of it? How do we recognize within our organizations where we can do this? The organizations who see that and understand how to do that are the ones that I believe are going to succeed. So that's what I predict, is that those people who are recognizing that and experimenting in the right way, following some of those patterns we were talking about there, that's the ones we're going to see a lot of success from.
Christine, your crystal ball?
I don't know if this definitely on the agentic AI. I agree with that. I'm seeing a trend even for smaller companies to go from dashboards to agents focus. But I'd say, and I don't know if this is so much a crystal ball, but I think looking forward as well as the past being a good indicator of the future, supply chain disruption is a new norm. And it doesn't matter, anybody has to like it, right? We don't have to, but in terms of whether it's being able to source from different suppliers, looking at variable raw material costs and ever-changing kind of market dynamics and pricing structures, I don't see that ameliorating anytime in the near future.
Okay. And Diego?
Yeah, I think everyone circle around this already, but I think the generative AI is bringing a new point of view on how we work and how we can work. But the interesting part is the speed and the efficiency that you are seeing here is because we reversed the flow. Before, consulting companies brought the technologies, proposed the solutions, etc. With ChatGPT and all the exposure that our employers had outside work, they are bringing the needs from their personal life to work and say, look, can you build me something that looks like this, that talks to me, that analyzes my documents, etc. So now we shifted from a solution provider that brought the innovation to the workers that saw the innovation elsewhere and are requesting teams like mine that build those tools to accelerate that. So it is people-centric again. It's our employers are asking for this modernization. So that's why I think it will be not on the next 5 or 3 or 2. We are already working on that sort of project.
Very interesting. Folks, in 30 seconds or less for each of you, we're obviously heading into some uncertain times here. If there's one thing you could impart on an executive or developer, on someone out there, one piece of advice, something you'd like to share, what would it be? Christine, I'll start with you.
Don't wait. Start getting ahead of things now. Start getting a handle on it. And yes, that means leveraging machine learning and AI and centralizing it.
Chris?
So I might be biased just because of the consulting and working across all the different industries, but leverage industry knowledge, leverage what your peers have done, leverage where there's been failures. That's where a lot of our frameworks and approaches come, is from what hasn't worked and also what has worked. Recognize those patterns of success and be open to learning from others. And Diego, you touched on that when I was talking about the partnership pieces. Like that's where I've seen the most success, is when we share the right things, but have that approach of to learn from others and to be open for others to learn from you.
Max?
Be transparent. Have AI decision often seen that are often seen as coming from a black box. Therefore, a robust government framework is needed for those this AI decision. And secondly, be accountable. So establish the right supervision structures, the overwatch protocols, and the mitigation mechanisms. So these two, definitely goes hand in hand with start right now, as Kristen was saying.
Yeah. And Diego, final thought.
Thank you. So I think if I would give an advice, would be like accept change. everything is changing. We have new tools, new climate. We have new logistics and supply chain. So accept change, embrace it, test new tools, test new ways of operating, keep operating, try to do the best, and again, accept the change.
Thank you very much, Diego. For Christine Andrews from Dataiku, Diego Salomone from Rio Tinto, Chris Juryn and Max Toupin from CGI. My name is Derek Marinos. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on AI in Canada, from Hype to Impact, Manufacturing Insights Exchange. Of course, this is also part of CGI's AI Global Insights Exchange. Thanks again. Have a great day. Be well, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.